Britain has a real problem with corruption in its politics. Money buys access in our politics. Money buys power in our politics. Money buys you a seat at the top of the table and it buys you what you want. If you are a Conservative donor and you give the party £3 million, you can effectively buy yourself a seat in the House of Lords. That's a seat in a legislative body for life. You know, for £3 million. I think a lot of people think that's pretty cheap. If you give the Conservative Party £50,000 a year, you get to go to quarterly, off the record, private briefings with the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers. That's a really cheap deal if you think about it, £50,000. And lots of these people then just so happen to get hundreds of millions of pounds of public money. And I think it's really important to remember that. This is public money. I think as long as money continues to play such a huge role in our politics, we're going to be in trouble. And at the moment, in the competition between money and democracy, money is winning. Geoffrey Cox was the Attorney General, a long-standing Conservative MP, and also a man with private business interests as a lawyer, earning over £1 million a year. On top of his job as an MP, he gets paid a basic salary of £82,000, which some Conservative MPs have said just not enough to live on. And just remember, folks, that's almost 4 times the average income here in the United Kingdom. During COVID, he was representing the British Virgin Islands government, so that's a government of a tax haven, in a corruption case against the United Kingdom government. So the United Kingdom government was pursuing a corruption case against the British Virgin Islands and he was defending them. Mr. Cox, we discovered as well, had an interest in a film scheme that had been labelled as a tax avoidance scheme and had been investigated in the past that he hadn't declared. And the thing that strikes you time and again with someone like Geoffrey Cox, who are they serving? Like, who is their master? If someone is a member of Parliament, is that not their job first and foremost? But if they're earning many times their salary as a consultant for a private company, who are they representing? And I think in many ways what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. Like, Geoffrey Cox didn't break many rules, but what he did, I think a lot of us have a huge problem with it. And that's the big issue with this. Actually, it's not about necessarily rules, it's about what's right. And if the rules say this is okay, well then the rules are wrong. It's worth remembering that so much of this kicked off in the last few weeks because of Owen Paterson. Owen Paterson lobbied on behalf of Randox. Randox won hundreds of millions of pounds in government contracts to provide COVID testing in particular. Think about what Randox got out of this. For a couple of £100,000, they were able to get a parliamentarian to lobby on their behalf. And at the upshot of that, they ended up with these huge sums of COVID contracts. £500 million in public money. Owen Paterson to this day says, I would do the same thing again tomorrow. I did nothing wrong. The only reason this scandal broke out properly was because the government had so much hubris. Boris Johnson thought he could do whatever he wanted, and he thought he could just knock the whole house of cards down to save Owen Paterson. He realised he couldn't do that because of public pressure from people like Open Democracy, frankly, from journalists, from politicians, from civil society who said, look, we won't stand for this. But at the end of the day, you've still got the same people, the same systems, the same leverage of money and power in our politics that allowed Owen Paterson's lobby, allowed so many others to lobby. And I think what we've seen is a culture in British politics that's very, very relaxed about MPs having vested interests outside of politics. Shortly after he left office as Brexit Secretary, David Davis was hired by JCB at £3,000 an hour to give consultancy advice. What kind of advice, frankly, would David Davis be able to give for £3,000 an hour? Just so happens JCB are one of the biggest Tory donors, very close to the Conservative Party. I think that asks a really, really legitimate question about what are people buying for this sort of money? It feels like MPs all too often are willing to just say, yeah, just anything that comes along. And MPs had trousered over £6 million since the pandemic began from second jobs. They include everything from Theresa May, who's get paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to deliver after dinner speeches. And if you've heard Theresa May speak, you would wonder who was going to pay that kind of money to listen to Theresa May, and you could draw your own conclusions about what people are buying really there.
Why we will never... Oh, excuse me.
She is not alone. We've seen a lot of MPs getting paid significant sums of money to do things like be consultants, to sit on the boards of companies, to represent private interests in government. What it shows is the extent to which we've normalised and think it's okay for people to profit from political life. And it's not just in the short term as MPs. And I think there's a real danger by fixating on second jobs. We miss probably even a bigger issue, which is the revolving door that politicians and the private sector pass through all the time. A fifth of the new intake of Conservative MPs from 2019 had a background in the lobbying industry. And this is a huge industry. And time and again, you know, we said they were going to reform lobbying legislation in the wake of David Cameron, the Greensill scandal, where David Cameron was being paid to be a lobbyist for Greensill, but wasn't actually registered as a lobbyist because the law didn't mean that he had to. And that was the law that David Cameron himself brought in. So once you stop being an MP, you can then go and work for companies and earn huge sums of money. Imagine you're an MP here and you become a minister and you're thinking, well, I'll probably be only in this job for a couple of years. Once I'm gone, I'll get a nice cozy job in the private sector. Are you going to make the hard decisions that need to be made in the public's interest? Or are you going to think about where you're going to be in a few years' time? So many MPs have got their own experiences in this. So many MPs, like Keir Starmer, have made lots of money while also being MPs, are not probably best placed to say what needs to come next. And I think that's the fundamental problem in British politics, where we expect MPs to regulate themselves. You know, we saw what happened when we let the banks regulate themselves, and we're going to go back there. That's what we think is the way it needs to happen. I think we need independent regulation. We need independent bodies to hold these parliamentarians to account. We can't just leave it up to the leader of the opposition or anybody else to say what should and shouldn't be the norms of our politics. Behind all of this is the reality that big business want to influence government. And in some ways, by focusing only on MPs, focusing only on what MPs are doing, we miss a huge part of this story, which is that these huge companies want to influence. And we have created a system that's actually tailor-made for them to buy influence, to be able to influence government. And we know it works. Here at Open Democracy, we're often trying to reveal the corporate side of all of this. In some ways, if we don't, what will happen is these organisations, these big businesses will find other ways to influence our politics without us realising it. I think any democratic system in which people are able to buy access like this, where people are able to get MPs, parliamentarians, ministers to do their bidding in exchange for money, begs huge questions. I think there's a huge compromise in our democracy. That's something we have to all be very, very worried about, and for far too long we haven't done enough about it. I think what's really worth remembering about this whole Owen Paterson story and the whole kind of lobbying scandal that's breaking in government and the whole kind of sleaze scandal, as we call it, but I think sleaze is probably too kind a word. I think we should call it what it is, which is corruption. But what's missed, I think, in a lot of this is the government was willing, and I think would be willing again, to do anything it can to avoid independent scrutiny. Yes, Boris Johnson rolled back on things like second jobs, but don't forget what he tried to do and what he did do with the government legislation that was passed said that they would replace the existing independent standard watchdog with basically a quango staffed by Tory MPs that would be headed by John Wishingdale, an MP who himself had regularly broken standards. And actually, a quarter of the Tory MPs who were pushing for this new committee had themselves been found to have broken standards rules and been criticised by the Standards Committee. But behind all this, I think, is a bigger question, actually oddly bigger than just corruption and sleaze. It's the question of the lengths that Boris Johnson and Boris Johnson's government are willing to go to avoid independent scrutiny. And it's not just about things like parliamentary standards. We have an election bill going through the Commons, which is a disaster. It's going to change the oversight of the Electoral Commission, put it into the hands of the government effectively. We have similar things with the Migration Bill. We have the Official Secrets Act change that are going to make jobs of journalists like me even harder than they are now. This is not just an isolated incident. I think it's so important to see this not just as part of the corruption of government, but that corruption extends far more than just in terms of lobbying and second jobs and everything else. It extends to actually independent oversight and scrutiny of the government of this country. Independent media has been at the heart of revealing this scandal. Here at Open Democracy, we've told so many stories that have made a difference when it comes to exposing the corruption and sleaze in British politics. Please do support Open Democracy, www.opendemocracy.net, and please do think about going to Patreon to support the wonderful work that Double Down News does.